Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to give it a few more minutes for others to hop on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. For those that just joined, we're going to give it a few more moments, and then we're going to get started. Thank you.
All right, I think we'll get started. Greetings to all who are joining us today, and welcome to PAI's Catalyst session. My name is Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins. I'm the president and CEO of PAI. And for those who do not know as well, PAI is a civil society organization that is based here in Washington, D.C. For 58 years, we've been championing universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights around the world. And really the centerpiece of that advocacy over the decades has been around access to family planning and contraceptives. We advocate to our own government and on the global stage, and we also have the great privilege of working with 120 local advocacy organizations across 36 countries as they further their own domestic priorities through advocacy to achieve sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. I welcome all of you, and I thank you for your voice and your commitment to the shared cause. Before I get started, I want to hand over to our senior manager for strategic communications, Katie Unthank, who's going to cover a few housekeeping items, and then we'll formally get started. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Nabeeha. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Before we get started, just a few items to go over. First, thank you for attending PAI's latest and greatest Catalyst session. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available through PAI's channels following the event. For the Q&A portion of today's webinar, please feel free to submit a question for either Oying or Nabeeha at any time using the Q&A feature available in Zoom. We will have time at the end of our discussion to take some of your questions. Also, if you have any technical challenges during the event, please send us a message in the chat and a member of the PAI team will work with you directly to resolve your issue. We also encourage you to connect with us on Twitter throughout today's conversation using the hashtag and handles I'll be posting in the chat shortly. Thank you again for joining, and now I'll turn it back over to you, Nabeeha.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So today we're hosting our third and our final Catalyst session of the year, and so thrilled to have the guest that we have today. This is a space for candid fireside style conversation, and having those conversations with those who are influencing and impacting, in addition to transforming our shared journey to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. We're so pleased to have a leader who's dedicated so much of his life's work to advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights, and more importantly, creating the inclusive and encouraging spaces so many can join him and so many of us on this mission, whether that's leading foundations, whether it's his leadership and role through research collaborations in the classroom, and soon in Thailand at the International Conference for Family Planning. We're really thrilled to have senior scientist Jose Oying Rimon II. He's the chair of the International Steering Committee for the 2022 ICFP and director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Institute for Population and Reproductive Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Oying is an internationally recognized leader in population and reproductive health and family planning. It's extraordinary. He has led and supported over 300 advocacy, behavior change, and knowledge management projects across Asia, Africa, and the Near East, across a range of public health issues. He also led the policy and advocacy portfolio at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that covered family planning, maternal, neonatal, and child health and nutrition. And the piece that I find very special from a PAI perspective is that we count Oying as a friend, as an advisor, as a longstanding collaborator. After all, for nearly 10 years, our organizations have worked together on the Advanced Family Planning Program that really focused on propelling the power of civil society to successfully lead family planning advocacy efforts in their own communities. It's a great pleasure, Oying, to welcome you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nabeeha. It's always a privilege to be part of this Catalyst series. Not many know that I have a long kind of history with PAI, the founder of PAI, the first director, when it was still known as the Population Crisis Committee, was a lady named Phyllis Putro. And when she transferred to Hopkins, she became my boss. So there's a connection there, a historical connection. Yeah.
That's very special, and I did not know that. So thank you for sharing. Well, Oying, let's get to it. And the first question I always like to ask our guests is really about what led you on this path. So tell us about you and what led you down the path you've chosen. Tell us really what inspired you to be part of these efforts to advance SRHR around the world.
Sure. So I'll give you a short version. Yeah. I was born and raised in the Philippines, and once I graduated from my first graduate degree, I was sitting in front of the building, just trying, to relax when you graduate. And one of my professors sat down beside me, and he said, "Are you free this afternoon?" And I said, "No, I'm not really free. I'm just relaxing." He said, "I need your help." And I said, "Help about what?" He said, "Well, I was hired by the Commission on Population as a consultant to do the following things." And he said, "I can't do it, but somebody like you could probably help me do it." So though I said, "I'm not really interested. I'm not really interested, But he was my professor, and I was relatively free that afternoon. And he said, "Why don't you come with me? We'll drive to the Commission on Population." So we did drive to the Commission on Population. I was very impressed, first with the building, then I was impressed with the people, And then he said, "So I just need you for 3 months, just for 3 months." So I thought about it and said, "Okay, 3 months." But when I returned the next day, he said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that you have to go through personnel." And I said, "Yeah, but I don't need to do that, don't I?" He said, "No, it's a government bureaucracy. It's under the office of the president. You have to go to this process." So very reluctantly, I went to personnel, and they said, "Oh, you have to take this exam, that exam." I said, "No, I'm not really interested, because I'm only here for 3 months. Why do I need to take the psychometric exam, this exam, right?" Said, "Well, that's the policy, sir. There's nobody, would be allowed, unless you pass this." So I said, "Okay, fine." I did it. And then a few days later, I was told that, "Mr. Rimon, you passed, but, you need to report to the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, because you were a student leader, you used to lead demonstrations, and at this very high level in which you are being hired, you need to be cleared by security. So I passed through that, and to tell a long story short, the 3 months became 8 years. I rose quickly through the ranks and became essentially the head, of the agency at some point, very, very young, in my life. So that's how I entered this world, through the Commission on Population under the Office of the President in the mid-70s.
What an incredible story, and from 3 months to a lifetime. And I was, as you were talking about your protest on having to take the exams, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if you got out of it, but you didn't. But it's so great to hear that. So knowing all the different roles and perspectives that you've been a part of, in particular on reproductive health, but across advocacy, if we were to center specifically on the family planning agenda, given all of these perspectives, the experiences that you've had, what do you really see as standing in the way, and what are the bright spots that we need to better leverage as it relates to universal access?
I think we need to recapture the magic, that infused the movement, especially in the late 60s, early 70s. In those days, we were very creative, or the people in this business were very creative, were risk takers, nothing, no barriers, was seen, as insurmountable. Let me cite to you a few examples, okay? Why this magic? So even during the time of Margaret Sanger, for example, just one episode. So Margaret Sanger challenged the scientists. This ended up, of course, Greg Pincus, was an inventor of the pill, John Rock, a hardcore Catholic who became involved in this, and a Chinese research assistant, MC Chang. And here was the challenge, from Margaret Sanger. I want you guys to develop a contraceptive which you can use whether you are in the tropics or you are in the winter, a contraceptive that is controlled by women, that don't necessarily have to be linked to a man, a contraceptive that you can use every day, without any intrusion. So why don't you do that? And of course, if you look at it at the time, you would say, this is crazy. You can't have something like that, right? But that was the challenge that Margaret Sanger gave, to the scientists. And of course, Greg Pincus, who couldn't even get, a tenure at Harvard, rose up to this challenge. And of course, this entire enterprise was funded by a woman philanthropist in the name of McCormick, if you remember, So here again, you've got people dreaming of something that at that point in time, you thought it was crazy, but it did happen. The contraceptive pill, was born and revolutionized essentially the movement, at the time. And then you have somebody like the guy in Thailand, Michai Bravadia, who again, in the late 60s, early 70s, thought that the biggest challenge was essentially to remove the taboo about discussions and family planning. And he was already talking about creating the norms. And he said, well, I want people to, every time they think about condoms, it's just ordinary like cabbages. So wherever cabbages, there's condoms. So it's not a big deal, And that's why he became famous for condoms and cabbages. He had mass vasectomy during the king's birthday. You have condom blowing contests, in many schools, everywhere, just remove, the taboo, from the topic. And then you have another one in Latin America. His name was Fernando Tamayo, the founder of Pro Familia, one of our greatest NGOs in the world, and he had one idea, brilliant. He said, if you offer the services free, most people may think, that it's not valuable because it's free. So my philosophy, pro familia, is that you have to pay something in order to access family planning and contraceptives. Simple idea, but brilliant. And at one point, in fact, Pro Familia was providing 70% of all services in Colombia at one point. So there are many other examples of this, and I think that the need for us is to capture many of this imagination, risk-taking, things that our forefathers, so to speak, did during their time. And in this case, we need really the brains and the enthusiasm and the passion of young people around the world. This is the opportunity that we have.
So the examples that you shared and the opportunity that you note in particular with youth and youth-led efforts also very much aligns to the notion and the commitment having to do with localization. And those who are closest to change should have the support and the sustenance to carry forward the work, but also inform the work. So I'd like to pivot just slightly to the current global conversation around localization, which I know is a very big topic, but what's your overall take on this? And what are the unique considerations that we all need to account for as it relates to family planning, but also the space for sexual and reproductive health and rights advocacy?
Localization as a North Star is a good objective for all of us, but I think we have matured enough to learn lessons from there, so we cannot be just ideological in the way we should be proceeding at this point in time when we have learned so much lesson on this. So I think the lesson that we have learned, and I learned personally, even during my time in the Philippines, is, to have power at the local level, you cannot be unconnected. You cannot be disconnected. The power is in your connectedness, whether it's your connectedness, within the country, with other organizations, with the network that you play, or at the international level. That is so critical and so important. So if we only move to localization in the sense that, okay, local organizations are better because they are operating, where the real problem is, but they are unconnected to each other, disconnected, to the international lessons learned, to all the others, that are doing the same work worldwide, I think we would have failed. We would have failed. We would have wasted a lot of resources. And then we say, oh, what wrong did we do? What wrong have we committed here? So I think that you at PAI being linked, to many of these local organizations, that's the connection. That's one of the connections that I'm talking about. The more we are all connected rather than disconnected to each other, the more power we have as a community of advocates.
Oying, what you say rings so true. As you note, PAI does work with so many local CSOs. Over 95% of our partners are community-based organizations, indigenous community organizations, and we're hearing very similar to what you've noted is first that localization means many different things to many different institutions and points of view. And, in some cases, it could mean direct funding to an organization. In other cases, an organization doesn't want the direct funding, but wants an equitable and equal seat at the table to inform the priorities, to guide the investments, to able to have that space to elevate their voice and their impact. And so I think this piece around localization, it's interesting because our partners are saying, let's have a conversation of what that means in our individual context and the context of the ecosystem. And at the same time, this idea from many of our partners is as we move down that path, let us not lose what you say, the connectivity, the connectedness that an ecosystem, a network of advocates possess, because there is some concern that in this journey toward a localization only or a localization exclusive path, we create fragmentation in the advocacy space. And our power is an individual impact, but our power is also collective impact and collective voice. So I really appreciate that point of view where it's multiple approaches and multiple ways of working, but let's not lose the strength of that ecosystem. So I want to build on that a little bit and move into ICFP. This notion of the power of community and the connectedness that you so well put. It's that impact of the advocates, the researchers, the donors, those who are implementing programs, policymakers, and so many more, that when we come together, when we share our strengths, when we advance the common cause, we are better. And that's precisely the name of the game when we are in Thailand for the ICFP in November. Tell us a little bit about who's going to be there, what we can expect, and what you hope some of the outcomes are going to be from this global gathering.
Thank you for that question. First, I think we need to understand that from the very beginning, the International Conference for Family Planning was never conceived to be just a conference. It has always been conceived to be a platform owned and driven by our community. That has always been the conception from the very beginning. It's a platform that all of us own, and therefore we're accountable to it. The Gates Institute happens to be just a host, of that platform, and every time we do it, we look for a co-host country. Okay. So it's not just what happens during the conference itself, what happens before, what happens during, what happens after that, and the community, the voices, that we all have put together, reflected, in the ICFP platform, is the key to all of this. So it's not just a conference. So this particular event in Pattaya, I think I would dare say would probably, some people would say, oh, you can't top the experience in Bali. Oh, you can't top the experience, in Rwanda. I think we may, First, there will be a huge delegation for young people in this conference. And from what I hear, the young people are now, our youth delegates are now developing their own global program of action on their own, not dictated to them, but on their own. And they will bring this to Pattaya and socialize this among all the other young people there and launch this global program of action of young people, and they will knock on our doors, all of us, until 2030 and beyond. So I'm always heartened, when young people are involved, because you could see the passion, the new ideas, the energy, the risk-taking, that young people bring, to the table. I think you and I, Nabeeha, we're young.
We're very young, Oying.
And you have that invincibility, in terms of what you think you can do. We have to tap into that. Okay, so that's one. This will also be the conference where we probably have the largest representation of parliamentarians around the world. Working with our parliamentary group friends, we expect maybe up to 40 parliamentarians from all over the world coming. And I think they're going to launch their own version of a global parliamentarian action during the conference. The third is that on the second day of the conference, November 15, that's also the time when we observe the 8 billion. It used to be the 8 billion baby, but I think that's being reconceptualized, the 8 billion person, on Earth. And it's happening on November 15 during the conference itself. And you will be surprised. I think that there are some huge plans, on the part of our colleagues at UNFPA, to tie this 8 billion event, to the universal health coverage, and the ICFP. We also expect around maybe up to 30, maybe more ministerial level delegates that would be coming to the conference in a series of ministerial meetings. So that is also going to happen. But to me, because this is the largest scientific conference in our community, what is really, how would I say, so good about this is that in the submission of individual and group abstracts, we were overwhelmed by the number of submissions and the quality of the submissions. Over time, it's almost impossible, to separate those that were accepted and not accepted. So the quality of the work and the science and the research and the evidence, is getting more and more of higher quality, and that will be reflected in many of the sessions, that we will be having. And just to show the pent-up demand, we have so many pre-conferences occurring, before the actual conference. You have one for the private sector. There's one, on demographic dividend. There's one for the youth. There's one, for the faith-based group, and many others. I could not mention all of them here, but there's so many happening even before the conference, kind of the reflection that, hey, we haven't seen each other for a long time. We might as well be cost efficient. If we are going to come to the conference, let's move our own agenda within through the process of the pre-conference. And as of today, I can't promise this, but we're having some serious discussions with probably one or two heads of states, who would like to come. I'm not at liberty to divulge at this point in time, but if this happens, I think it would also inject, another big time advocacy, for all of us. And finally, our friends at FP 2030, remember the FP 2020 is gone, right? We're not FP 2030. So this would also be the opportunity for our colleagues, and all of us involved in the FP 2030 movement, to be able to see, okay, what are the commitments and where are we heading as a team, all of us, as a community.
It is so exciting because all the individuals and the range of experts and the diversity of roles to advance this movement will be coming together, right? It's, as you've noted, it's more than a conference. I'm taking as you're speaking, it's really a space for us to share, but also there's going to be ample space to co-create and to connect with each other. And I think that's the work that sustains down the road. And related to that, you and I have talked a little bit about what we need to do after ICFP, and we'll have great outcomes, great energy, momentum. How do we keep that momentum going? What's your advice to advocates? What do we need to do to sustain that momentum and advance the conversations beyond Thailand?
So one of the lessons that I've learned from the founder of PAI, who also became my boss later on, that in this business and any movement, what is really important, to move any agenda is critical mass of leaders, of people who are involved. Okay, the more there are of us as a community of advocates, as a community of scholars, the stronger we are. Okay, so to me, as we move forward after ICFP and during ICFP, there will be some critical areas, of work that we need to do, especially among advocates. First is how do we continue the visibility and the fact that family planning has been revitalized and brought back at the in the global agenda. How do we do that? So ICFP is just one. FP 2030 is another mechanism to be able to do that. And FP 2030 is also decentralizing. So you have all of that. But to me, again, this is on my own personal bias, having been the former principal investigator of the Challenge Initiative, is that the fight, in my opinion, has to be brought at the local levels. National is important, but the engagement at this time, the world is decentralizing, and it's been decentralizing for the last 15, 20 years. The power of the decision-making, the policies, the power of the purse has been moved over to the local governments. So we need to engage with the governors. We need to engage with the mayors, whether it's towns, cities, provinces, or state. That's, to me, is where the action is. We will continue to engage at the national level, but that's where the action is. And if we do that, I think we will unlock a lot of new players and a lot of resources that we have not even dreamed about. For example, take the Challenge Initiative. To become part of the Challenge Initiative, I think there are 160 cities now involved in this. You have to allocate your own money, to become part of it. So it's demand driven, right? And then you can become part of the Challenge Initiative. And just imagine 160 cities allocating and spending their own money, on family planning and reproductive health. Okay. But over and above that, we have also seen that the power of the purse goes beyond just allocating to family planning, reproductive health. It's allocating to health systems change, because you can't do many of the things you want to scale up in the area of reproductive, maternal, neonatal child health and family planning if you don't reform the health system. So we're also seeing that reform of the health system comes with this. And with the reform of the health system, I think the argument is that the case for greater self-reliance and sustainability becomes becomes stronger, And we are tracking, for example, under Challenge Initiative, the amount of money that on the health systems, and it's like 5 times the money for family planning. But all of those changes in the health systems have impact not only on family planning, but on a range of other services that we all care about. So to me, that is one area.
Go ahead, Oying. I was going to ask a follow-up just on the funding piece, but I don't know if there was anything else.
The other thing that we always say, okay, what is the funding window on all of this? Okay. So we should just not look at the traditional sources of funding, which means in our case, it's always like the bilaterals, the multilaterals, the foundations, for example, and the new emerging ones, the foundations at the country levels, are becoming big players, in my opinion, on this. But we have to be really smart. Where are the monies that have already been allocated, and how we can tap into that? So I'll give you 2 examples. Okay. What have we learned from the experience in Latin America that we can apply to the rest of the world, kind of customized? So to me, how the money is already in the national health insurance schemes. It's happening like wildfire in many countries. In some countries, just starting. The money is already there, the billions of dollars. The key for our advocacy is, how do we bring about the use of that money to support access to contraception? The money is already there. It's just our power of persuasion that this is a good investment for the national health insurance schemes. Okay. I can see in Asia, for example, huge amounts of money in the national health insurance schemes. I can speak more on that if prompted, but that's one area. There's another area which is also conquering the world.
Well, why don't you build on that, Oying? Why don't you build on that piece? Because I think it's a great illustration.
So the three countries that I'm kind of familiar with, for example, India, there's a Ayushman Bharat, that's what they call it. It's the largest health insurance scheme in the world, larger than Canada, the US, and Mexico combined. Now the question, and they have allocated about $7,000 for every eligible family in the scheme that they can spend a year. Okay, that's a lot of money. Okay, now the question is, how can we make sure that family planning is part of that overall scheme? The money is already there. It's just a question of being creative. It's a question of where the entry points are for us. You have the case of Indonesia, which as part of their commitment to universal health coverage, they also have a national health insurance scheme. And family planning is highly covered in that. Okay. In the case of the Philippines, they use the sin tax, the tax on alcohol and tobacco, to beef up the health money for the national health insurance scheme. And it covers now certain methods, but the question is, how many more methods can we have that covered under the national health insurance scheme? So in Latin America, I think Mexico has done this for a long time, I'm not that familiar with the experience in Brazil and the others, but certainly in Mexico, most of the services are not done by the Ministry of Health. It's done by the Social Security scheme, within Mexico. You're very familiar with this because you're familiar with what they're doing there. So that's an area I think that we have to be very creative. And as a community of advocates, we can learn from each other how it was done in one country and then how we adjust, from one country to another. The other area that we can learn from is, again, this conditional cash transfer. I'm telling you that one of the largest budgets, in Indonesia and also in the Philippines, I'm very familiar with both of them, is the cash transfer program, to address poverty issues. Now, the question is, how do we include some aspect of reproductive health or family planning into that and not cross that territory that we so loathe, which is the coercive part of it, that we can be accused of moving into that territory, So it has to be very creative. It has to be very smart in how to access that. But the money is already there. Maybe we can learn, from the experience of other countries.
It's so incredible in this piece that this is the money is there. We just have to be very creative and perhaps think of other ways and other modalities by which to access it. And I'm sure that we'll be unpacking that further at ICFP. I have two more questions for you, and then we're going to share some of the questions and comments from those who are attending in the chat. So if those who are attending do have questions, please put them in now, and we'll bring some of them forward. Oying, the theme of ICFP is around universal health coverage and primary health care and how we advance family planning access through these critical priorities. However, we also know that access is a lot more than simply having a budget line item or having the commodities, although, of course, those are absolutely fundamental. I want to ask you, what else do we need to account for in this journey toward family planning access, toward contraceptive access, and toward integrating family planning and other SRHR services into primary health care, into UHCA, into UHC, so that no one is denied?
I'll answer you in a slightly different way. There was a research that was conducted when I was still at the Gates Foundation. And this was a research on what are those barriers, that continue to be there, that would not allow scale and coverage, whether it's family planning or maternal neonatal childhood and other services. So what are those barriers? rather than talk about health systems changes in an abstract way, we talk about, okay, what are those barriers? Let's find out first what those barriers are, and then we can tackle those barriers, and is there anything common? So this research was conducted in 3 countries in Africa, okay? I was shocked, but when I reflected, I was like, wow, what a common sense finding, okay? The major finding in this research, the number one barrier, okay? Guess what? The perception of a potential client, how he or she will be treated if they come to a certain health facility. That was the biggest barrier. So think about it. I was thinking about it. I said, well, isn't that really commonsensical? It's common sense, hitting you right in the face, but the research has to bring it out for you to even consider how powerful that finding is. If you I apply that personally to me, I would say, okay, I'm based in Baltimore, right? Should I go to Johns Hopkins University Hospital, which is considered one of the top hospitals in the world? Should I go to some other hospital, right? The question to me is, how will I be treated? That's the number one question, at the top of my mind, how will I be treated if I go to this facility as opposed to this facility, okay? And to me, we need to address that because many other issues are associated with that, okay? The perception of, okay, what's quality? It may be related to that. How young people will be treated when they come to this health facility is important, on this. I will tell you, we have some, in my opinion, it will be published soon, some revolutionary finding. I call it revolutionary finding in the Challenge Initiative in Uganda. So when we layered the AYSRH, Adolescent, Youth, and Reproductive Health, into a classic family planning program, we were surprised at the findings, completely surprised that it succeeded the Adolescent, Youth, Sexual, and Reproductive Health programming in terms of its objectives. But what we did not expect is that those who were receiving services 24 years and above also increased significantly. So we said, like, wow, this is a bonus effect, a boost effect, And we look at this so many different ways, and okay, so when you focus your program on how you treat young people well, it also has a boost in terms of how you treat people well overall, whether they're young or old. And to us, that is one signal. How do you address many of these barriers? Okay. So the demand side is very important on this, as well as the supply side. And you can't just do the demand and not do the supply side. You have to do both of them. So on the supply side, you have to have your whole site orientation. You have to have your universal referral. You can do your 72-hour makeover. You go to a facility on a Friday, shut it down. On Monday, it's a completely brand new facility, in which a whole site, not only it's the mental makeover, but also the physical makeover. So ideas like that, I think, and there are many ideas around those types, how you address the demand and the supply. If we are creative, we will discover many of those ways, of addressing those barriers.
Oying, this piece on quality is also very top of mind for me and for the entire team and certainly our partners. And I was just in Guatemala, I think I mentioned to you last week, for a couple of days, and was visiting with our partner SEGS. And what they were talking about quality and the human element piece of how are people treated when they access services? Are the doors open? Are they treated with respect and kindness? Are they listened to? In particular, the issue around the treatment of youth and the treatment of indigenous communities and rural people who are living in conditions of poverty. And it has an effect on our access to family planning and sexual and reproductive health. But in Guatemala, and they will be coming out with some information and a report that is Guatemala focused, but I think has global ramifications, is when you have a public health crisis such as COVID, and you're trying to get communities to trust the health system, to show up for vaccinations, to show up for information, their experiences remain. It doesn't change overnight that suddenly they're going to access the health center when they were mistreated, when, for example, they came to request a contraceptive or request for care for their child. They opt out because there is the human piece of how am I treated, and is my voice being heard, and am I able to access not just quality treatment and services, but also quality in terms of how people talk to me and how they listen to me and how they follow up. So your point is so well taken, and is a huge barrier as shared by our partner SEGs in Guatemala, but I think it applies across the board.
You know, I could teach a class at Hopkins on transformational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And as part, you know, of teaching this course, you also listen to your students, or some of the best students around the world, and you learn from them, you know, actually. So let's take the case, for example, of one particular private sector entity in Nairobi. It's the Matari system of Shofco. Okay, you go into that place and you come out and said like, oh, the security guard greeted us. The receptionist greeted us. And then all the way, every single person you met there was a touch point there, right? You said like, wow, they really get it. You know, they really get this, you know. And they went through a whole site orientation, you know, a mental makeover, you know, that every person in that health facility has a role to play. And to me, it was just a great revelation. Later on, about 3 months ago, there were some donors who went, you know, to the same facility. And one of the donors was saying, you know, that this is the management by looking at the toilet facilities, you know. So this donor said, okay, you know, I have to do this anyway. So went there and expecting that this would be your usual, you know, toilet facility that you could barely use, right? And he came back and reported, like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. Like, there is water, it's functioning, it's clean, you know, it's part of the whole system change, you know, because again, here, material resources are very important, but the non-material resources are sometimes more important than the material resources. So non-material could be the trust, the confidence, you know, how you treat people are non-material resources. But they are equally as important if we have to address many of the barriers on both the supply and the demand side at the same time, not separately.
So Oying, I have a couple of questions that have come through from the audience and some common themes. So summarize into 2 questions, and I'll ask you the first one from the audience. Why do you think there is hesitancy on the part of implementers to incorporate family planning and access to contraceptives within plans to provide universal health coverage?
Hesitancy. Well, it depends, you know, where you are. You know, there is hesitancy when you exaggerate the hesitancy, in my opinion, you know, and say there's nothing more we can do because the overall atmosphere is not favorable to us, right? There are many ways of addressing that as an advocate, and this is where creativity and brilliance, you know, occur, you know. Then the question is, how do we address that hesitancy? Okay. Part of this hesitancy, of course, is that when you talk about primary health care, right? The experience around the world is such that family planning is always left out. So that's the other part of hesitancy, When people say, oh, let's do the primary healthcare approach, well, sometimes in that primary healthcare approach, family planning is always left out, or more or less always left out. But there are experiences in other countries around the world where the approach of family planning, primary healthcare, actually enhances family planning within that. It's not sacrificed. So we can learn from the experience of Ethiopia, for example, where they have a very successful primary healthcare approach. It's well documented by the government of Ethiopia and the International Institute for Primary Healthcare. How do they do this so that family planning is actually central, to the way they approach primary healthcare? So we can learn many of the lessons here. To me, I'm the type of person that if there is hesitancy, then you go to the root cause of it. What's the problem here? And how do we address it? I think if you were schooled in the advanced family planning smart advocacy, you get trained to that, What is the real story here? What's behind you? What's the root cause? And that's what you address.
Thank you, Oying. The second question we have here is how do we, and you touched upon this, but I think there's always a craving to dig deeper on this topic, is how do we better engage with and incorporate the voices and experiences of youth as we advance this movement?
So the youth legitimately always tells us that the quality of youth engagement is as important, as anything else, so that it's not just like a cursory, oh, we have involved the youth, that they're really, truly, part of this. I can easily not sympathize, but agree with this, because even at a very young age, I was already, making a lot of consequential decisions, when I was in the Philippines. Just imagine this. I was 24 years old. I was negotiating with every city mayor, with every governor, in order to put a population family planning program in place in every city, in every town, and every province in the Philippines. But I never saw myself as a 24-year-old. In fact, when I recall this, it's just like I was an equal. I dealt with the governors, I dealt with the mayors, I got what I wanted, right? But it never occurred to me to even think that I was young. So in my opinion, again, our own young people, let us not underestimate them. Don't say, oh, young, they're not mature enough, they don't have enough experience. In fact, sometimes, that is the strength. Remember, even if you study Nobel laureates, right? They may get their Nobel awards, when they're 60s or 70s or 80s, right? But sometimes it's because of the work they did when they were still young. So to me, do not underestimate the ideas, the power, the vision, the passion that young people will bring. If we don't do that, this movement that we have will have no future, in my view.
I love that, and I'm coming off of some inspiration this morning, because I was fortunate to give some plenary remarks at Bangladesh's 7th annual youth conference on family planning. And this precise conversation of youth-centered, youth-driven work, but also recognition that young people are more than just there to provide inspiration, to be a voice. They're on the front lines making the change. They're working with policymakers. They're coming up with the creative and bold experiences. And we have a responsibility, even though Ying, you said that you and I are young, we may not fall into the official UN numbers of age, but it is our responsibility for those who are not so young, when young people knock on our door to say, I have this idea. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to prioritize. We have a responsibility to not only open the door and talk to them, but also make sure that they are funded and sustained to keep that work going. So it's exciting to hear this perspective. My last question for you is a very important question. I think perhaps the most important of our session today. So do pay attention. We have a live stage at ICFP. And
Yes.
on that stage, people will make commitments. They will share experiences. They will talk about the impact that they've had. But there's also some space here for the artistic display of talent in the way of poetry or song or dance. And you're a terrific dancer, Oying. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Are you going to be performing on the live stage?
Well, I'm challenged in terms of my talent in singing, but I can certainly dance. Maybe not at the level of Dancing with the Stars, you have to prepare for that. But yes, yeah, I'm always into dancing because dancing is a celebration, and that's what we need. While we have barriers to conquer and surmount, we have issues to deal with. We should always not forget. Again, the typical thing we always say, sometimes stop and smell the roses. Sometimes celebrate. Because when we do that, because this is sometimes in our community, we have the tendency to flag ourselves, to criticize ourselves too much. And therefore, we said like, okay, we have failed, and we have not. So to me, celebration, smelling the roses, congratulating each other, hugging each other, fist bumping each other is really important. That's also the human connection that all of us need to have.
Thank you so much, Oying. I look forward to dancing with you and hugging you in Thailand. And it's been such a pleasure to have this hour with you, Oying. I've always felt that you are such an inclusive, inspiring leader. And it's also so reassuring that we may have a long journey ahead of us, but there's optimism and there's hope and there's new energy. And your words have also fueled and sustained advocates and partners who've been in this for a very long time. So thank you so much, Oying, and appreciate all of our guests for joining us today and hope to see many of you in Thailand.
And thank you too for considering me to guest on your Catalyst program. Very much appreciate that. Thank you for this opportunity.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.